So this week we learned that the entire cybersecurity industry is held together by duct tape and popsicle sticks. And apparently, one of those popsicle sticks, sitting all the way at the bottom of that leaning tower, depends on a single government contract getting renewed. And this week we found out that that contract was in jeopardy. If you haven't heard, of course, I'm talking about the whole CVE debacle. A quick rundown is a nonprofit research organization that is generally funded by the government. They maintain a whole lot of programs, but they, along with every other entity tied to government funding, is going through an interesting year. They're set to lay off over 400 people between now and June. And this week, they put out this letter. Well, actually, this letter leaked before they put it out, stating that on Wednesday, April 16th, today while I'm recording this, the current contracting pathway for MITRE to develop, operate, and modernize CVE and several other related programs such as CWE will expire. The government continues to make considerable efforts to continue MITRE's role in the support of this program. In service were to occur, we anticipate multiple impacts to CVE, including deterioration of the National Vulnerability Database. If you're completely unfamiliar, this is the centralized database that the entire cybersecurity industry coalesces around for all vulnerabilities. I don't need to tell you what a CVE is if you're on this channel. I've talked a lot about CVEs. Every vulnerability out there winds up getting a CVE number associated with it. So according to this letter, if this contract expired today, they would no longer be able to maintain it. No new entries or no new CVEs would be cut. So say if this whole contract thing went down tomorrow, if Microsoft Windows came out with a whole bunch of vulnerabilities, there would be no centralized database that was currently funded and maintained to put an identifier to those vulnerabilities. So Microsoft would do their own vulnerability disclosure publicly. And if you were a customer of Microsoft, you would just have to watch for that announcement and not have this centralized repository of information and standardized language that we can all operate around. I saw a diagram floating around LinkedIn. James Berthotti, thanks for putting this together. I just wanted to illustrate that whole popsicle stick at the bottom of the pile thing that I was talking about earlier. So this is the general flow. If a vulnerability is discovered, you can pass it to MITRE, which would publish the CVE. There are a lot of CNAs, CVE numbering authorities. These are major companies with dedicated teams and a good track record of putting out good information around vulnerabilities. Big players like Microsoft and Google. Then once a vulnerability gets a CVE number, it goes into the National Vulnerability Database. This is funded by the Department of Commerce, NIST, and some other organizations for about $8.5 million. The CVE program funding was about $30 million after some people dug up some of the government contracts. This is funded by the Department of Homeland Security and CISA. Once this vulnerability ends up in the National Vulnerability Database, NVD is supposed to enrich it a bit, give it a severity, give it some more information, mitigation information, and whatever. NVD leaves a whole lot to be desired, but it is a good centralized location that a lot of security products and security programs are built on top of. We're talking like all vulnerability scanners out there, things like Sneak, Qualys, Rapid7, Nessus, and then not even just vulnerability scanners. A lot of other security products are ingesting all the information that winds up published in the National Vulnerability Database in order to provide their product or service to all of their customers. So the entire cybersecurity industry. Luckily, this whole contract fiasco didn't go down. I'm going to get into that in a second. But one of the things I really wanted to talk about on this video is if we're building security programs, I've run vulnerability management for some of the largest financial institutions on the planet. It was my job to run the vulnerability scans every day. It was part of my job to deal with ingesting all of this information from these databases to see if we agreed with their severity ratings and all that kind of stuff. So one of the other things I wanted to talk about is how can we reduce our reliance on something obviously so fragile. And before we get to that, we got to pay the bills around here. And this one is super relevant. If you are building a security program, you're going to love the word from today's sponsor. All right, quick break to tell you about today's sponsor, Vanta. If you're building or scaling your security program, this next part is definitely for you. At some point, someone you're trying to do business with is going to ask you, hey, are you SOC 2 compliant? Or how about ISO 27001? Or how about HIPAA? And all of a sudden, instead of building a product, you're neck deep in security questionnaires and spreadsheets and policy creation. And I've seen it happen time and time again where you have very talented engineers all of a sudden filling out spreadsheets about your security program. This is exactly where Vanta comes in. And I could spend this time reading some stuff from their website about how they automate 90% of the work that it takes to get compliant via all of these popular frameworks. But instead, I wanted to tell you about my real experience with Vanta. If you don't know, I do a lot of advisory advisory CISO type work. I've also been on both sides of this "Are you SOC 2 compliant?" question. I've built security programs from the ground up for startups, and I've helped run huge parts of security programs for giant financial institutions who have to ask these kinds of questions. A number of startups that I'm advising right now as their CISO are using Vanta to help get them compliant in weeks instead of months. We're talking companies with, prior to me coming on board, no sense of a security program and barely an IT team. And instead of spending all this time not building their product, they fire up Vanta and it gives them exactly what they need to become SOC 2 compliant, which their potential customers and investors are currently asking them to be as soon as possible. That's why I'm super stoked that Vanta decided to sponsor the channel. And they've given my audience a discount code that you can get $1,000 off if you go to vanta.com/MattJ. It's time you figured out why over 10,000 companies, including Atlassian or Factory or Flow Health, are using Vanta to manage risk and prove security in real time. Again, this discount code can get you $1,000 off at vanta.com/MattJ. All right, back to the video. Thanks for that. And like I said, we don't have to worry about a lot of this right now because CISA did come in the 11th hour and actually close this contract. So last night, CISA executed the option period on the contract to ensure there will be no lapse in critical CVE services. Hey, just really quick, why do I keep reading headlines that are imminent disaster, can kicked, number of days, weeks, months? And these are all self-inflicted wounds. I don't understand this. Between TikTok bans, tariffs, and now this, we got to pick a lane and stick with it. Self-inflicted wounds saved by self for some period of time in the future. I don't know. One of the other pieces of news to come out of this is that this caused enough of a freak out that some people on the CVE Foundation, the board that isn't actually associated with MITRE, but is obviously closely related to them, a lot of these people actually broke out and started a new nonprofit called the CVE Foundation to make sure that they could secure funding for this regardless of what's going on in the government. So you can see here at thecvefoundation.org, I'll put this in the description. For immediate release, CVE Foundation launched to secure the future of the CVE program. Since its inception, the CVE program has operated as a U.S. government-funded initiative with the oversight and management provided under the contract. While this structure has supported the program's growth, it has also raised long-standing concerns among members of the CVE board about the sustainability and neutrality of a globally relied upon resource being tied to a single government sponsor. This concern has become urgent following the letter that we just read that came out on April 15th. In response, we founded this. The new CVE Foundation will focus solely on continuing the mission of delivering high-quality vulnerability identification and maintaining the integrity and availability of CVE data for defenders worldwide. They're going to release more information in the coming days. This is the entire website right now, is just this press release. What I'm hearing about this is they've basically secured private funding from a number of different vendors that are already intimately familiar with and aid the CVE board and all the operations. So they're just going to come forward and make sure that it's clear that they maintain this. If you guys want a taste of the panic that was going on over the last 24 hours, John Hammond, first of all, congrats on 2 million subscribers, John. Go sub to John's channel if you're not. You probably are. I've got like no subscribers. He has 2 million. All bow to John. But John put out an awesome video going over just the entire reaction from the cybersecurity community yesterday. I was part of it. Like, what happens now? So a post that caught my eye over on LinkedIn is from Tara Wheeler over here that talks about what do you do if you can't rely on the NVD or the CVE program. I'm all about resilience. I would like to clarify that doing this is not easy, but it's an important thought experiment to get your wheels turning. Holy crap, we almost just had less than 24 hours notice that our entire vulnerability management program and industry was about to break. So to everyone out there that said, well, we don't have a backup plan, well, how about we make a backup plan? So I think Tara's advice here is pretty solid. They talk about prioritizing the vendors that you have in your organization, especially the ones that you are patching vulnerabilities for regularly. Think your firewall vendor, your endpoint operating system vendor. What web browsers are you standardized on? What's basically your organization's critical infrastructure? I also kind of laughed when I read this because I've worked at some places that would not be able to identify their top 10 vendors. And I challenge that maybe 10 is not deep enough. But okay, good thought experiment. If there is a pattern of 2 to 3 decently large, probably in severity, CVEs that have been issued in the last pick a time period, assume that over that time period, that trend will continue. So if you have someone on staff doing threat intel, congrats, you're above the cybersecurity poverty line. If you don't, it might be time to start to subscribe to some threat intel feeds, even open source ones, and start to tune that information towards your organization's critical infrastructure. Figure out what vulnerabilities are being talked about across the web 4 products and services and SaaS and whatever it is that are all over your org. And then have a playbook of what happens when one of those alerts hits. Tara says, figure out the POC that the threat intel person find and test it and see if you're exploitable. But your playbook can be whatever you want. Maybe you home grow a vulnerability scanner that doesn't ingest from NVD based off of some open source vulnerability scanner out there. And you have a playbook that can feed information from this kind of intelligence into your open source scanner. I know that this is easier said than done. I know that this requires talent, time, budget, tools that are already stretched remarkably thin. Even in the most funded security programs that I've worked for, it's not like we had people sitting on the bench twiddling their thumbs ready to pick up a huge project like this. The gist of what I'm getting at is let's use this moment of holy crap, someone just kicked that popsicle stick out from the bottom of the tower as an excuse to pause and take a moment to learn and figure out a backup plan. I'd encourage you, if you do figure out a backup plan, talk about it publicly. Other organizations can learn from your experience. What are you building in response to us almost losing the National Vulnerability Database? All right, hug ops to all you vulnerability managers out there, anyone who works in security who had a panic attack over the last couple of days. I've had jobs recently that this would have been a very bad week for me. I've been talking about this a lot real time on all my other socials. You can find the links below, and please subscribe to my newsletter while you're down there. Do all the YouTube stuff too. Like, subscribe, share with your mom. I really appreciate it as I get this channel started. It helps more than you know. Thanks again. Follow for more cybersecurity news.